The laptop snaps shut. The client's final email is sent. Done. The blue light of the sent confirmation screen painted my face for a second before I killed the display. The silence in the room deepened, a void left by the sudden absence of my furious typing. I pushed back from my desk, the worn-out office chair groaning a complaint. My whole body ached. A long week of debugging someone else's messy code, a week fueled by stale coffee and the low-grade anxiety of deadlines. But it was over. Friday evening. A cold beer called to me from the fridge, a siren song of crisp, golden relief. Just the thought of it made me swallow. I stood, stretching my arms high above my head until my spine popped in 3 distinct places, a satisfying, weary sound. My bedroom wasn't large. To my left, the queen-sized bed, its grey comforter still a mess from the morning. To my right, the closet, its louvered door slightly ajar. Straight ahead, across the beige carpet, was the door, the gateway to the rest of my apartment, to the kitchen, to that beer. My eyes scanned the room for a moment. Just a room. The Franklin Place, apartment 7B, my home for the last 2 years. Nothing special. Framed posters for bands I barely listened to anymore hung on the walls. A stack of novels I meant to read sat on the nightstand. The air smelled faintly of dust, and me. Normal. I crossed the small bedroom in a few strides, the floorboards making no sound under my bare feet. My hand reached for the doorknob. The brushed nickel was cool against my palm, solid, real, a familiar grounding sensation. I twisted the knob. It turned smoothly. I pulled the door open. The hallway stretched before me, dim and familiar. The cheap runner carpet looked worn in the low light from the living room. The faint smell of my neighbor's garlic-heavy cooking hung in the air. I saw the edge of the kitchen counter. I saw the muted glow of the streetlights through the living room window. I lifted my right foot, ready to take that first step into freedom, into the weekend. Instantly, I'm standing back at my desk. The laptop is in front of me, its screen a black mirror. My hand was not on the doorknob. It was resting on the back of my chair. The door was shut. A sharp click echoed in the room, the sound of a latch settling into its frame. What the hell is going on? My mind was blank. A full stop. I stood motionless, my gaze fixed on the closed door. Was that a microsleep? A brain fart? I'd heard about those moments of total dissociation, tiny seizures of consciousness brought on by exhaustion. It had to be. I was burned out. I hadn't slept well all week. I shook my head, a quick, violent jerk as if to dislodge a bad thought. "Okay, Cole," I muttered, my own voice sounding strange. Too much screen time. I walked back to the door, my steps firm this time, deliberate. I planted my feet on the carpet. I watched my own hand reach out again, my fingers wrapped around the cool metal of the knob. It felt exactly the same. I turned it. I pulled. The door opened. There it was again, the hallway, the runner, the garlic smell, everything in its place. I stared at it, a snapshot of reality. I lifted my foot again, more cautiously this time. I watched my bare toes cross the threshold, leaving the bedroom carpet and touching the rougher fibers of the hallway runner. I did it. I was out. Click. Back at the desk, frozen in place. Facing the black screen of my laptop, the door was closed. My heart, which had been beating at a slow, tired rhythm, gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. A jolt, like a faulty electrical connection. My blood froze. This is impossible. It wasn't a dizzy spell. It wasn't a microsleep. I had felt the hallway carpet under my foot. I had smelled the garlic. The two realities, the sensation and the result, were at war in my head. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. My throat was dry. Is this a joke? Some kind of elaborate prank? But who? How? There were no cameras in my room, no projectors. The door was solid wood. The walls were drywall and insulation. I built the desk myself from a kit. They were all real things. Panic began to brew, a hot liquid rising from my stomach. I don't walk this time. I rushed towards the door, my bare feet slapping against the floor. My palms slammed against the wood, the impact stinging my skin. I didn't bother with the knob. My fingers dug into the crack, into the frame itself, and I yanked it open. With a guttural yell, I tried to lunge through the opening, not to step, but to fall into the hallway. Click. I was slammed back to my starting position, standing at my desk. The force of it knocked the wind out of me. I gasped, stumbling back a step, one hand flying to my chest. It felt as if an invisible rope had yanked me back. A physical, violent rejection. My heart was pounding now, a frantic drum against my ribs. I could hear it, a wet, panicked thudding in my ears. My eyes darted around the room. The window. I lurched over to it, my hands smacking against the cold glass. I looked down at the street, 4 stories below. Cars moved. Headlights cut through the deepening dusk. A woman walked her dog. The world outside was still there. It was moving. It was normal. The glass was solid under my furious push. It didn't even vibrate. I turned away from the window, my back pressed against the wall. The texture of the paint was rough against my shoulder blades. I dragged in a shaky breath, and then another. I listened. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. I didn't hear anything from outside the door. Not anymore. No neighbor's TV. No hum from the building's old elevator. No traffic from the street. The garlic smell was gone. There was only silence. A deep, profound silence that felt heavier than sound. The low hum of my desktop PC was the only noise, and it suddenly seemed sinister, conspiratorial. What is this? How can this be? My mind was spinning with questions, each one more frantic than the last. Was I having a stroke? A psychotic break? Is this what it felt like to lose your mind? The smooth, clean slide from reality into this. My eyes scanned the room, hurriedly, desperately, looking for an answer, a clue, anything that was out of place, anything that could explain the fracture in my universe. The bed was still unmade. The posters were still on the wall. The closet door was still ajar. The desk, the chair, the lamp, all of it was mine. All of it was normal. And then I saw it. My gaze locked onto the nightstand next to my bed, on the small silver-plated frame I'd had since college. The framed photo. Me and my sister, Sarah. It was taken 5 years ago at Cannon Beach. We were grinning, squinting into the sun, the ocean roaring behind us. Her arm was around my shoulder. My hair was a windswept mess. It was one of my favorite pictures. But her face, her smiling face, was gone. It was not a blur. It was not a smudge on the glass, where her features should have been. Her bright eyes, her wide, toothy grin. There was now a swirling vortex of digital static. A hissing, roiling nest of black and white pixels, fizzing like a dead television channel. It was a hole cut into the fabric of the photograph, a window into nothing. My face was still there, smiling next to the buzzing void that used to be my sister. I couldn't breathe. For a full 10 seconds, my lungs forgot how to work. A shiver, violent and cold, ran down my spine, making my whole body shake uncontrollably. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't a hallucination. This was real. This was happening. Something was wrong here. terribly, fundamentally wrong. And it was in the room with me. I stood rooted to the spot. My whole body was paralyzed. My eyes were locked on the silver frame, on the nightmare it held. The static wasn't still. It writhed, a churning nest of black and white chaos where my sister's smiling face should be. It was like watching a million tiny insects boil under glass. The sight was a magnet, pulling my sanity into its fizzing vortex. I could almost hear it, a high-pitched electronic hiss that wasn't coming from the picture, but from the inside of my own skull. I tore my eyes away, a physical act that took a surprising amount of force. I gasped, and the sound was raw in the dead air. The door. It was always the door. The picture was a distraction, a scare tactic. The problem was the door. The solution had to be the door. This time, I didn't walk or run. I launched myself at it, a missile of flesh and bone. My shoulder was going to hit first, I decided. I would splinter the frame, buckle the hinges, and tumble out into the hall. I braced for the impact, for the glorious pain of splintered wood and freedom. My shoulder never connected. Click. I was back at the desk. The jolt was more violent this time. It snapped my head back. My teeth clicked together, hard. I stumbled, catching myself on the edge of the Bauchan desk. The black monitor reflected a distorted, wide-eyed stranger. Me. My heart was a wild animal thrashing in my ribcage. I could hear the wet, frantic thudding in my ears. The picture frame on the nightstand was still there, the static churning, mocking me. "No," I whispered, the word barely a puff of air. "No." I tried again. I gripped the knob, my knuckles white. The metal felt wrong. Too smooth. Too perfect. I refused to look away from the hallway this time. I would stare it into existence. I pulled it open, my eyes fixed on the dimly lit runner carpet beyond the threshold. I saw it. I saw the scuffed baseboard. I saw the faint outline of the coat rack. I locked my eyes on it. A drowning man staring at a life raft. Click. Desk. Door closed. Stillness. The silence rushed back in, thick and heavy. Again. Click. Desk. Again. Click. Desk. Each reset was a punch to the gut. An invisible force, absolute and unyielding, snatched me out of my own intention and put me back in my place, my starting position, like a piece on a board game being reset by an unseen hand. A hot, furious pressure built behind my eyes, tears of rage, of terror. My throat was dry as sand. I backed away from the door slowly, my hands held up in a gesture of surrender. My back pressed against the wall. The rough paint scraped against my t-shirt. I had to think. There had to be a way. A logical explanation. But logic had fled the moment Sarah's face dissolved into noise. My eyes scanned the room, desperate. The bed, the closet, the desk, the door, and the window. Of course, the window. My only other way out. The one part of the room that still seemed connected to the real world. I'd seen the cars, the woman walking her dog. It was 4 stories down, but a broken leg was better than this. Anything was better than this. Hope, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of my panic. I pushed off the wall and rushed straight towards it, my bare feet slapping the carpet. I was ready to use my fist, my elbow, the base of my desk lamp. Anything to shatter that barrier between my prison and the world. My eyes were fixed on the street lights below, on the promise of escape. I stopped dead. 2 feet from the glass. My heart didn't thump this time. It just stopped. A complete cessation of all activity, leaving a cold, hollow void in my chest. Outside, there was no street, No cars, no dusk sky. Where the familiar evening skyline of downtown Franklin should have been, there was now a wall. A solid, grimy brick wall. It was inches from the glass. So close I could see the fine cracks in the mortar, the dark, ugly water stains bleeding down from unseen leaks. It was ancient and filthy, an unbroken expanse of reddish-brown clay and decay that filled the entire window frame. There was no wall there a minute ago. How can this be? My mind recoiled. It refused to process the image. My brain kept trying to superimpose the memory of the street over the impossible reality of the bricks. I pressed my face against the window. The glass was cold, frigid. It bit into my skin. The bricks were real. They didn't flicker. They didn't waver. I could see the rough texture of a single brick right in front of my eye, chipped at the corner. The wall was a final, damning statement. The room was sealed. A sound, like a strangled sob, escaped my lips. I stumbled back, my legs weak. This wasn't a loop. This wasn't a glitch. This was a construction. A cage being built around me, piece by agonizing piece. Something inside me snapped. The last fragile thread of reason, of the man who debugged code and paid his rent on time, just broke. It was replaced by something primal, a blind animal rage. This thing, whatever it was, had made a mistake. It had pushed me too far. It had sealed the cage, but it had left me inside with the last of my strength. Without a moment's hesitation, I spun around. My eyes fell on the desk chair. It was heavy, solid oak, with cheap metal casters I had always meant to replace. It was the heaviest thing I owned. I grabbed it. I didn't lift it with my legs. I tore it from the floor with my back and arms, my muscles screaming in protest. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck, trickling down my spine. I hoisted the chair over my head, its weight unfamiliar and monstrous. The casters dangled near my face. The room tilted. My vision swam. For a second, the only thing in my universe was the chair, the window, and the rage that fueled me. I roared, a wordless, guttural sound of pure defiance. With every ounce of my being, I swung. The chair flew from my hands, a clumsy, spinning projectile aimed at the heart of the window. It soared across the few feet of space, a perfect arc of violence and desperation. This was it. This had to be it. The sound of shattering glass would be the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It hit the window with a soundless impact. There was no crash, no shatter, no crack, not even a thud. The heavy oak chair struck the pane of glass and simply stopped. But its momentum didn't just vanish. It reversed. The chair bounced off the window as if it had struck a slab of solid iron, as if it were a rubber ball. It flew back into the room, tumbling end over end, and crashed onto the floor. The impact with my own carpeted floor was deafening. Wood splintered, metal bent with a sickening groan. The chair landed in a broken heap, one leg snapped clean off, the backrest hanging by a single screw. A wreckage. The window was untouched, pristine, not a single scratch, not a smudge. The grimy brick wall stared back at me through the perfect glass, impassive and eternal. I stared at the broken chair, then at the window, then back at the chair. My breath came in ragged, painful gasps. I felt like an invisible hand was squeezing my chest, forcing the air from my lungs. The rage evaporated, leaving behind a residue of pure, helpless dread. Brute force was useless. Logic was useless. Hope was a lie. I sank to my knees. The fight was gone. I was just a man in a room that was rewriting its own laws to keep me here. I put my head in my hands, the rough texture of my palms a strange comfort against my skin. The silence returned, deeper this time, weighted with my defeat. The only sound was my own harsh breathing and the frantic, useless beating of my heart. And then A new sound. It was soft at first. So soft, I thought it was just the blood ringing in my ears. I held my breath and listened. There it was again. A humming. It was a child's humming. A little girl, maybe, singing a nursery rhyme, but the tune was wrong. It was discordant, a seesaw of notes that didn't belong together, an off-key, wandering melody that scraped at the edges of my hearing. It was the kind of tune a child makes up on the spot, aimless and unnerving. My head snapped up. Where was it coming from? My eyes darted around the ruined room. Not the door, not the window. It was close. It was in here, with me. I turned around, my body stiff, my muscles screaming in protest. I looked towards the bed. My whole body stiffened. A shiver, violent and cold, ran down my spine, making me shake uncontrollably. Sitting on the edge of my unmade bed was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. She wore a simple, pale yellow dress that looked old-fashioned. Her legs were short, her bare feet dangling a foot above the floor. Her dark hair was cut in a neat, straight bob. She was humming that awful, meandering tune, her head tilted slightly as if listening to a song only she could hear. She stopped humming. The sudden absence of the sound was more jarring than the sound itself. In the crushing stillness, she looked right at me. Her eyes were wide and vacant. They were like two polished stones, dark and empty, reflecting the dim light of the room without a flicker of life or recognition. She wasn't looking at me so much as through me. A cold, clinical observation. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My mind spun with 1,000 frantic questions, but they all collapsed into one. What is this? What the hell is going on? My gaze flickered from her empty eyes to the corrupted photo on the nightstand, to the impossible brick wall behind the glass, to the wreckage of my chair on the floor. These were pieces of a puzzle I couldn't comprehend. And she was the newest piece, the most terrifying one yet. So, who is behind all this? The humming filled the air, a thin, reedy sound that scraped at my nerves like a fingernail on a chalkboard. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a piercing quality that cut through the thick stillness of the room and drilled directly into my brain. The little girl just sat there on my bed, her small legs swinging back and forth in a carefree rhythm that was a grotesque mockery of my state. Her bare feet made no sound as they sliced through the air. How can this be? My thoughts were a frantic scramble, a cascade of impossible questions. This wasn't a hallucination spawned from panic. I had seen the brick wall. I had felt the chair break against the unyielding window. I was lucid. I was awake. And she was here. Her dress, a pale, washed-out yellow, was stained near the hem with what looked like mud, or maybe something darker. Her black hair, cut in a severe, straight line across her forehead, was tangled and dull. She looked like a photograph from another century had come to life, but had brought the dust and decay with it. She looked at me, and I felt a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a profound sense of wrongness. Her gaze was a weight. It did not plead or threaten or question. It simply observed. One small, grimy finger lifted from her lap. It was a slow, deliberate movement, her arm extended, pointing a trembling digit not at me, but past me, towards the wreckage on the floor. Her finger was aimed squarely at the broken heap of my desk chair. My blood ran cold. She knew. She had seen it. She had been here the whole time. A silent witness to my violent, useless rage. The humming didn't stop, but it seemed to thin, to become even more dissonant, as if her focus was now on her gesture. My back pressed against the wall, the rough texture of the paint an anchor in a world that had come unmoored. I couldn't tear my eyes from her. What is this? What does she want? Is she the cause of this, or is she trapped here too? The questions spun and collapsed, leaving no answers, only a residue of dread. As if responding to my unasked question, she lowered her hand. From a pocket in her faded dress, a pocket I hadn't seen, one that seemed too small to hold it, she produced a small, dog-eared notepad, the kind with a spiral binding at the top, and a single black crayon, the paper peeled halfway down its length. She placed the notepad on her lap. She looked down at it, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. For a moment, the only sound was that awful, meandering tune. I held my breath and listened. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. Then came the new sound. Scratch. Scritch. Scratch. It was brutally loud in the room, a dry, sharp sound that set my teeth on edge, the sound of wax being scraped over cheap paper. Each stroke was deliberate, unhurried. She wasn't scribbling, she was drawing, composing something. The humming continued, weaving itself around the scratching of the crayon, creating a two-toned symphony of madness. It got inside my head. The tune and the scratching became a single, invasive presence I couldn't block out. I wanted to clap my hands over my ears, but I was frozen, pinned to the wall by a morbid fascination. Reflexively, I raised a trembling hand, my palm open, a universal signal to stop, to be silent. Shh, I tried to say, but my throat was dry as bone. No sound came out, just a dry, clicking noise. It was as if my own voice had abandoned me. She paid me no mind. Her small head remained bowed, completely absorbed in her task. Scritch, scratch, scritch. A flicker of anger, hot and sharp, cut through the ice of my fear. This was my room. My room. I was a prisoner, yes, but I would not be a passive spectator to my own torment. I pushed myself off the wall. I had to do something. I had to confront her. I began walking step by step, my bare feet sinking into the carpet. I was moving cautiously, trying not to make a sound, as if I were approaching a wild animal. The floorboards under the carpet were silent. The room seemed to be holding its breath with me. "Get out!" The words came out this time, but they were a wreck. A splintered, broken thing that cracked in the middle. It was barely a whisper. She didn't look up. The humming didn't falter. The crayon didn't stop. It was like I hadn't spoken at all, like I wasn't even there. I was 3 feet from the bed now. I could smell her. A faint, cloying scent of damp earth and something else, something like old attics and forgotten things. Goosebumps erupted across my arms. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck, trickling down my spine like an icy insect. "Did you hear me?" I said, my voice finding a sliver of strength. "Get out of my room!" She paused. The humming stopped. The crayon went still. The sudden silence was a physical blow. It pressed in on my ears, heavy and suffocating. Slowly, she lifted her head. Those vacant, polished stone eyes found mine again. There was nothing in them, no fear, no anger, no recognition. It was like looking into the lenses of a camera. My nerve broke. I abandoned her. The plan to confront her, to grab her, to shake her, it all evaporated. There was only one imperative: the door. I had to try the door. It was the only way. Even if it was hopeless, it was the only action my mind could latch onto. Without a moment's hesitation, I spun and lunged. My feet flew across the floor, 2 strides, and my hand was reaching for the knob. My fingers wrapped around the cool, familiar brass. A searing electric pain shot up my arm. "Ah!" I cried out, recoiling, snatching my hand back as if I'd touched a live stovetop. The metal wasn't cold. It was scorching, blisteringly hot. I stumbled back, clutching my hand to my chest, my eyes wide with shock. The skin of my palm was an angry, throbbing red, a blister already rising on the fleshy part below my thumb. The pain was real. It was sharp and undeniable. Click. The jolt was like a physical shock, a full-body tremor that snapped my head back and made my vision swim. I was standing by the desk again. My bad hand, the one I was still cradling, was pressed against the smooth, cool wood of the desktop. I blinked. I looked down at my hand. The pain was gone. The angry red mark had vanished. The blister was not there. My palm was pale and unblemished, crisscrossed with its familiar lines. It was a normal hand. Again, as if the burn had never happened. My eyes darted around the room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A shiver ran down the length of my spine. The room was resetting. It was fixing the damage. The burn was damage. My gaze fell upon the floor. The desk chair was whole. It stood there on its cheap casters, solid and unbroken, tucked neatly under the desk as if I'd just pushed it in. The splintered leg was restored. The bent backrest was straight. The wreckage had been erased. No, this can't be happening. My mind reeled, trying to grasp the new rule. It wasn't just me. The room itself was part of the loop. It reset itself, cleaning up the mess, repairing the damage, my damage. Then, a new thought, colder and sharper than any before it, stabbed into my mind. If the room resets, then she... I turned, my movements stiff and robotic. I forced my head to rotate, to look towards the bed. I prayed to a god I hadn't thought about in a decade that the space would be empty, that she, like the chair, like the burn, had been a temporary part of the last loop, a glitch that would now be gone. She was still there. She sat on the edge of the bed, in the exact same position, notepad on her lap. She hadn't reset. She was not a part of the loop. She was permanent. She was an anchor point in my swirling nightmare. The humming started again, that same off-key wandering tune. I felt a new kind of terror now. It wasn't the hot, panicked fear of being trapped. It was a deep, bone-chilling dread, the kind that comes from understanding. The rules were not random. They were being written by an intelligence. The impossible brick wall, the static-faced photo, the hot doorknob. They were barriers. And she was the jailer. She stopped humming. Again, the silence was like a physical presence. My muscles tensed up. I watched, barely breathing, as she looked down at the notepad in her lap. With a slow, precise motion, she gripped the top of the page she had been working on. Ripey. The sound of the paper tearing from the spiral binding was like a scream in the stillness. It was a final, ugly sound. She held the single sheet of paper between her thumb and forefinger. She didn't look at it. She looked at me. Then she held it out. An offering. I couldn't move. My feet were lead. My body was a statue of ice and stone. She waited. Her arm remained extended, the paper fluttering slightly in a draft I couldn't feel. Her patience was infinite. Inhuman. Swallowing, I forced myself to take a step, then another. I crossed the small distance between us, my eyes locked on the white rectangle in her hand. The air grew thick and heavy as I approached, charged with a strange energy. I stopped an arm's length away, close enough to see the drawing. It was a child's drawing, crude, simple, rendered in a single, thick black crayon. But it wasn't a drawing of a house or a flower or a dog. It was a drawing of a box, a long, narrow rectangle that took up most of the page. Inside the box, a stick figure was standing. Its arms were at its sides. Its head was a simple circle with 2 dots for eyes and a straight line for a mouth, a look of blank resignation. It was me. On the outside of the box, she had drawn thick, vertical lines, bars. It was a cage, a coffin, and next to the box, standing on the outside, was another figure, a smaller stick figure. This one had a triangle for a dress and a scribble of black for hair. It was her. And on her face, the simple circle of her head, she had drawn a wide, curving arc, a smile. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing my chest, forcing the air out. It was a confession, a mission statement, a blueprint for my own personal hell. She let go of the paper. It didn't fall. It fluttered, turning over and over in the dead air, drifting slowly, unnaturally, towards the floor. It landed face up on the carpet between us. A declaration. A final, damning verdict. The stick figure stared up at me from its paper prison. The little girl beside it smiled her crayon smile. My whole body shook uncontrollably. I looked up from the drawing to her face, her real face. For the first time, I thought I saw something in her eyes. Not life, not emotion, but a flicker of cold, ancient satisfaction. Then she was gone. She didn't fade. She didn't run. One moment she was sitting on the edge of my bed. The next, the space was empty. The indentation on the mattress smoothed itself out. The scent of damp earth vanished, but the drawing remained. A black and white scar on my floor, a promise. The paper lay on the carpet, a stick figure tomb, a crayon promise. I opened my mouth to scream, to let out every ounce of terror and disbelief that was flooding my system, to blast the walls with a sound of pure animal panic. Nothing came out, not a whimper, not a whisper, just a dry, useless puff of air. My throat was seized, clamped shut by an invisible fist. I felt the scream trapped in my chest, a hot, swelling pressure with no escape. The only sound in the room was my own breathing. But it wasn't my breathing. It was a ragged, wet-throated rasp that echoed back at me from the walls, guttural, foreign. It sounded like the last gasps of a dying animal. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. I listened to it, horrified. That sound was coming from inside me. My back pressed against the wall. My eyes darted around the room, a frantic insect trapped under glass. From the empty spot on the bed where she had been, to the cursed drawing on the floor, to the door. Always back to the door. It was the source and the end, the alpha and the omega of this nightmare. My gaze snagged on the doorknob, the brass gleaming innocently in the lamplight. My palms still held the ghost of the burn. How can this be? My thoughts were a shredded mess. She was gone, but the evidence of her was left behind. The rules were inconsistent. They were malicious. The chair fixed itself. My hand healed itself. Why did the drawing get to stay? A new sound started. It sliced through the silence and the rasp of my breathing. Skreek, skreek, skreek. It was a metallic grinding, slow, rhythmic, and deliberate. A sound of immense pressure, the sound of old metal being forced to turn. It was coming from the right, near the closet. I moved my head slowly, my neck stiff, not wanting to see what was making the noise. My muscles were tensed up, coiled springs of dread. My heart was pounding, a heavy thud, thud, thud against my ribs. An old man was there. He knelt by the closet door. He hadn't been there a second ago. My eyes had swept that exact spot and seen nothing but beige wall. Now he was there, as solid and real as the floorboards he was kneeling on. He wore a pair of faded blue work pants and a gray oil-stained shirt. His hair was a thin, white halo around a bald, liver-spotted scalp. He was completely focused on his task, his back partially to me. In his gnarled hand, he held an old, rust-stained screwdriver. He was meticulously, painstakingly tightening the screws on the lower hinge of my closet door. With every turn of his wrist, the screwdriver let out that agonizing protest. Skreek, skreek. My whole body shook uncontrollably. This was new. This was different. Lily was a phantom, an aberration. This was a man, a solid flesh and blood man. Hope, a stupid, treacherous thing, flickered in the pit of my stomach. He was real. He had to be. Maybe he was from maintenance. Maybe he was the key. I pushed myself off the wall, my legs unsteady. I swallowed, my throat dry as dust. "Hey!" The word came out as a raw crackle. It sounded loud in the otherwise still room. The man didn't look up. He didn't even flinch. He just kept turning the screwdriver, his knuckles white with effort. The screw groaned as it sank deeper into the wood and the frame. Skreek. I took a step closer, my bare feet sinking into the carpet. "Hey! Can you hear me?" My voice was gaining a desperate edge. "What are you doing?" He paused his work. He didn't turn. He just stared at the screw head as if it held the universe's greatest secrets. His voice, when it came, was a low, gravelly rasp, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a dry well. It had a thick Boston accent to it. "You broke the seal," he said, the words tumbling out without emotion. "Now the pressure's all wrong." The pressure? What is this all about? The words made no sense, but they were delivered with such finality, such mundane certainty, that a shiver ran down my spine. This wasn't a rescue. This was a diagnosis. I closed the distance between us in 3 quick strides. I was standing over him now. I could smell him. A faint odor of rust, motor oil, and old sweat. "I don't know what you're talking about," I pleaded, my voice trembling. "You have to help me. I can't get out of this room. The door." "Something's wrong with the door!" I gestured wildly at the main door to the hallway. "Please, you have to get me out of here." He finally finished with the screw, giving it one last powerful twist that made the wood around it creak. He shifted his weight, preparing to move to the upper hinge. He still hadn't looked at me. It was like I was a fly buzzing in his workspace, annoying but irrelevant. Frustration and terror boiled over. I reached down. I had to make him look at me. I had to make him acknowledge me. I was going to grab his shoulder, shake him, force him to face me. My hand went right through him. There was no impact, no resistance, just a sudden piercing coldness that shot up my arm like a syringe full of ice water. My fingers passed through the fabric of his shirt, through the flesh and bone of his shoulder, and into the empty air on the other side. It felt like plunging my hand into a cloud of freezing static. My vision swam. For a split second, I saw the grain of the wood on the closet door through his body. I cried out, snatching my hand back, stumbling away from him. I fell backward, landing hard on the carpet. I stared at my hand. It was pale and trembling, the coldness already receding, but the memory of the violation, the absolute physical impossibility of it, was burned into my mind. This is impossible. He wasn't a man. He was a ghost, a memory, something else. He paid my fall no mind. He had moved to the top hinge now. He fitted the tip of his ancient screwdriver into the slot of the first screw. He began to turn it. Skreek. Skreek. I scrambled backwards, crab walking away until my back hit the leg of my bed. I stared at him, my mind reeling. A phantom handyman, here to do repairs on my prison. What is this? This place wasn't just trapping me. It was maintaining itself, reinforcing itself. He wasn't opening a way out. He was sealing me in. The closet. Another door I could have tried to use, to break down. He was making it stronger. "Some doors ain't meant to be opened, kid," he muttered, his voice the same flat, gravelly monotone. He put his weight into the screwdriver. Skreek. "You fiddle with the frame, you lose the airtight fit. Simple physics. As he spoke, a sound drifted from behind me, a giggle. It was a sharp, high-pitched sound, crystalline and cruel. It wasn't the handyman. It came from the direction of the bed, from the empty space where the girl had been sitting. It was her giggle, a disembodied echo of her presence, mocking my terror. I whipped my head around. The bed was empty, the sheets were smooth, but the sound had been as real as the grinding of the screwdriver. Goosebumps erupted all over my skin. She was still here, watching. I turned back to the handyman. He was finishing the last screw on the top hinge, giving it one final, decisive turn. Screek, thunk. He grunted with satisfaction. He put his screwdriver into a loop on his work pants. Without a backward glance, he simply faded. He didn't walk away. His form just thinned, became transparent, and then dissolved into the air like smoke from a snuffed-out candle. The smell of oil and rust vanished with him. I was alone again, alone with the sound of my own ragged breathing and the memory of a ghost's giggle. My eyes fell on the drawing again, the stick figure in the box, the handyman tightening the screws on a door. It was all connected. It was a process, a procedure, and I was the subject. There was only one thing to do, the same thing I always did, the only thing I could do, the door. It was insanity. The definition of it, doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Except here, the results were always different, always worse. First, the reset, then the static photo, the hot knob. And now what? What new hell was waiting for me on the other side of that click? I got to my feet. My body moved as if on autopilot. My will was a passenger, strapped into a body that was hopelessly addicted to the loop. I had to try. I had to know. I walked towards the door, my steps slow and deliberate. I felt like a man walking to his own execution. My gaze was fixed on the brass knob. It gleamed. I reached out a trembling hand. I braced myself for the searing heat. My fingers touched the metal. It was cold, not just cool. It was a deep, biting, unnatural cold. Colder than ice, colder than any metal should be. It burned me with its frost. A sharp, needle-like pain shot up my arm, the polar opposite of the heat from before, but just as intense. I gasped, but I didn't let go. I tightened my grip, the freezing cold sinking into my bones. The instant my fingers locked around the knob, a noise behind me made me jump. Whump, thud. It was the sound of a heavy book falling off my bookshelf and hitting the carpet. I was startled and turned back, my heart hammering. My hand was still frozen to the doorknob. A single book lay on the floor, about 10 feet away. It wasn't one of the paperbacks. It was a heavy hardcover, one of the art history books I hadn't opened in years. It had landed spine up, but had fallen open, its pages spread like a broken wing. It lay directly under the lamp, perfectly illuminated. From this distance, I could see something on the right-hand page. It wasn't a print of a Rembrandt or a Goya. It was text. A few words, stark and black against the white page. They looked wrong. They were too clean, too dark. I let go of the doorknob, the feeling slowly returning to my numb fingers. I took a cautious step away from the door, then another, drawn towards the book. My eyes were locked on those words. The air was so thick that breathing was difficult. I knelt down beside it. The page was smooth and glossy, filled with dense paragraphs about late Renaissance sculpture, but scrawled across the middle of the page, interrupting a sentence about Donatello, was a new line. It was written in thick black ink. The ink was still wet. It glistened, smelling sharp and chemical. It looked like it had been written just a second ago. There was only one sentence, a simple 3-word command. Stop trying. Stop trying. The words were no longer on the page. They were inside my skull, branded onto my brain. A 3-word gospel for this new and terrible religion. I knelt on the floor, my hand hovering over the book, the chemical smell of the ink still sharp in the air. My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by a command I didn't understand, but felt in my very marrow. To stop trying was to stop breathing, to stop existing. It was the only thing I had left. I let my hand fall. The book lay there, an open wound on the floor. My gaze drifted away from it, unfocused. The handyman was gone. The rhythmic squeak of his work had been replaced by a silence that felt heavier, more complete, but it wasn't a total silence. Faintly, from the direction of the bed, I thought I could hear it, a low, off-key hum. The tune was formless, a child's mindless sound, yet it crawled under my skin. A shiver ran down my spine. Lily. She was still here, a phantom audience to my private stage play. Then, a new sensation. A smell. It wasn't the smell of old paper or wet ink. It was rich and loamy, the smell of a freshly tilled garden after a spring rain, the smell of fresh soil and damp earth. It grew stronger, not drifting in from a window, but rising from the very room itself. My eyes darted around, searching for the source. The window was the same, showing only the mocking brick wall. The door was the same, a monument to my failure. Nothing had changed, but something had. I looked down at my bare feet. They were planted on the beige, low-pile carpet of my apartment, but they weren't. My brain saw the carpet, but my nerves screamed a different story. The texture under my soles wasn't synthetic fiber. It felt cool, slightly damp. The individual blades were soft. It felt like cold, damp grass. My breath hitched. I pushed myself up slowly, my legs trembling. I lifted one foot. Specks of dark, rich soil clung to my heel. I stared at them, my mind refusing to connect the dots. I looked at the floor again, my eyes wide. It was still the beige carpet I'd vacuumed 2 days ago. But my feet felt the grass. My nose smelled the earth. My ears heard the ghost girls humming. My senses were staging a full-blown mutiny against reality. I couldn't believe my eyes. I couldn't trust anything. What is this? I took a shuffling step, then another. The feeling of damp grass and cool earth moved with me. It was as if I was dragging a patch of cursed graveyard around on the soles of my feet. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. My eyes scanned the room. A desperate, sweeping search for the next aberration, the next violation. My desk, the bookshelf, the closet, its hinges now supernaturally secure. The bed, the window, the door, back to the desk. A flicker. Just a twitch of movement at the edge of my vision. By my desk chair. I froze, my body going rigid. My heart, which had been a frantic drum, seemed to stop altogether. I turned my head with the slow creaking stiffness of a rust-eaten machine. There was a woman standing there. She was in a paramedic's uniform. Dark blue pants, a lighter blue button-up shirt. The fabric was worn, and I could see a faint brownish stain ringing the collar, like old sweat or something worse. She wasn't a ghost, not like the handyman. She seemed solid, real. She stood with a professional stillness, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Her face was placid, her expression one of unnerving calm as she looked directly at me. Time seemed to stop. The girlish humming ceased. The smell of soil faded into the background. There was only her. A jolt of something that felt horribly like hope shot through me. A paramedic. Paramedics meant help. They meant accidents. They meant the real world breaking through this nightmare. "Help me," I breathed, the words barely audible. She did not respond. Her gaze was steady, clinical. She took a step forward, her movements clipped and precise, the rubber soles of her boots making no sound on the carpet that felt like grass. My muscles tensed up. The brief flicker of hope was extinguished, smothered by a wave of pure dread. This was not help. This was another guest, another player in the game. "Stay away from me!" I yelled, the sound raw and desperate. I stumbled backward, my bare feet slipping on the phantom grass. My back hit the wall with a solid thud. I was cornered. Again. She didn't listen. She continued her unhurried advance. One step, then another. Her eyes never left mine, but they weren't seeing me. They were seeing a specimen, a problem to be analyzed. I tried to push myself further into the wall, as if I could melt through the plaster and drywall and escape into the next apartment. She stopped an arm's length away. Her presence was chilling. She raised a hand slowly, professionally. I flinched, expecting a blow, but her movements were calm, deliberate. Her fingers colder than the doorknob, colder than the ice that had passed through my hand, pressed against the side of my neck. The touch was electric, a shock of profound, deathly cold that seemed to leach the warmth right out of my blood. It wasn't the aggressive cold of ice, but the passive, absolute cold of the morgue. I tried to pull away, to scream, but I was frozen in place. My body was a statue of terror. I was so nervous that I forgot to breathe. My entire universe shrank to the 2 points of freezing pressure on my carotid artery. She was checking my pulse, her lips parted slightly. The sound that came out was not meant for me. It was a report, delivered to the empty air beside my head. Her accent was sharp, clipped, Eastern European. "Subject's heart rate is erratic," she stated, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. My heart was pounding, a frantic beast trapped in the cage of my ribs. Of course it was erratic. She shifted her cold fingers slightly, tilting my head. She peered into my eyes, her own a pale, washed-out blue. Pupils dilated, significant cognitive decline. Her words hit me like stones. Subject, significant cognitive decline. She was narrating my descent into madness as if reading from a chart. A small, cruel smile touched her lips, but it was a dead thing. It was a predator's smile, a mechanical baring of teeth that did not reach her cold, clinical eyes. I finally found my voice, a strangled gasp. "Who are you talking to? There's no one here." She ignored me completely. Her hand dropped from my neck, leaving 2 circles of icy numbness on my skin. She reached into a pocket on her thigh. My eyes were locked on her hand. She pulled out a syringe. It was a large one. The plastic yellowed with age. The needle was thick and long. It wasn't empty. It was filled with a fluid that was dark and viscous, almost black. It clung to the inside of the chamber, moving sluggishly as she turned it over in her hand. A single thick bubble of air drifted slowly toward the plunger. "This is impossible." My mind screamed the words. "This can't be real." She held the syringe up to the light of the lamp. The dark fluid inside seemed to swallow the light. She flicked it with a fingernail, her predatory smile widening. "This will calm the synaptic misfirings," she said, her voice now a low, almost soothing murmur. "This will provide clarity." The needle, the dark fluid, the smile, a switch inside me flipped. Primal animal terror overrode the paralysis. The instinct to survive, to flee from the sharp thing, from the predator, took over. "No," I choked out. I shoved her, hard. My hands connected with her shoulders, and for a terrifying second I expected them to pass right through her, but she was solid. My push sent her stumbling back a step. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I didn't wait. I didn't think. I scrambled for the door. My only instinct was to escape the needle, to get away from her and her clinical pronouncements of my decay. My feet pounded on the floor, the sensation of grass and earth gone, replaced by the familiar friction of carpet. I reached the door in a blind panic, my lungs burning. I didn't even try to turn the handle. I slammed my palm flat against the wood above the knob, a desperate, final plea. The world dissolved. Click. I was standing at my desk. The sudden stillness was deafening. The air was warm again. Normal. The smell of soil was gone. I was facing my laptop, my hand resting on its closed lid, just as I had been at the end of my workday what felt like a lifetime ago. The paramedic was gone. The needle was gone. The book was back on the shelf. I gasped for air, great, heaving lungfuls. My body was drenched in sweat. My hand, the one that had touched her, tingled with a phantom cold. I spun around, my eyes wild. The room was perfect, pristine, exactly as it should be. No handyman, no ghost girl, no paramedic. Was it a dream, a hallucination, a terrifyingly vivid waking nightmare brought on by stress? My heart rate was slowly returning to something resembling normal. I leaned forward, planting my hands on the surface of the desk to steady myself. The wood felt solid, real. I let out a long, shuddering breath. I closed my eyes just for a second. Maybe it was over. Maybe I had broken the spell. I opened them. My gaze fell on the computer monitor. It was off, a rectangle of glossy black glass, a mirror, and something was looking back at me. I stared, my blood turning to ice. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't my reflection, not my 32-year-old face, tired and scared. The face in the monitor was me, but aged 40 years. It was a death mask. The skin was pale and thin, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones and a hollow jaw. The hair was sparse and white. The eyes were sunken deep into their sockets, dark pits of endless sorrow. This skeletal, withered version of me, this ghost of my own future, was looking directly into my soul, and it was weeping. Silent, glistening tears carved tracks through the gaunt, wrinkled landscape of its face, dripping from its chin into an unseen void. It wasn't crying out. It wasn't screaming. It was a silent, profound, and eternal grief. The grief of a man who had been trapped for a very, very long time. I ripped my eyes away from the screen, a strangled noise tearing from my throat. I stumbled back. My shoulder hit the wall, hard. The jolt of pain was a grounding shock, a single point of certainty in a world that had dissolved into a nightmare. My heart was pounding, a frantic, trapped bird beating against my ribs. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at my hands. They were mine, 32 years old, veins standing out from the tension, nails bitten down. They were shaking uncontrollably. I flexed them, balled them into fists. They were real. I was real. My gaze slid back to the desk, to the monitor. It was just a black rectangle of glass, a blank surface. Nothing there but my own reflection, my own pale, terrified face staring back at me. No wrinkles, no skeletal features, no tears. What the hell is going on? My mind screamed the question. Was that a trick of the light? A momentary break? A hallucination born from the paramedic and the syringe? The air was still. The only sound was the ragged drum of my own breathing. I needed to do something. Anything. Some test to prove I still had agency. That I wasn't just a puppet in this suffocating play. My eyes darted to the window. The brick wall was still there, a flat, ugly expanse of red, but the glass was fogged with the moisture from my panicked breaths. An idea, desperate and childish, seized me. A message in a bottle. A plea. I lurched toward the window. My bare feet felt the carpet fibers, a small comfort. I pressed my palm flat against the cool glass, then lifted it away. My index finger, trembling, traced a word in the condensation, H-E-L-P. I wrote it again, pressing harder, M-E, help me. The letters stood there, shimmering and clear against the fog. For a single beautiful second, they were just words, a simple human plea. Then they moved. The condensation seemed to liquefy. The curved top of the P detached and slithered down, latching onto the side of the L. The vertical line of the P dissolved entirely. The two small legs of the M stretched, warped, combining into a single elegant curve that joined with the E. The letters rearranged themselves with a silent, hideous intelligence. It took less than a second. Hell me. It wasn't a request. It was a statement, a definition, a brand. A shiver ran down my spine. This is impossible. I recoiled from the window as if the glass had become white hot. I staggered backward, my heel catching on the edge of the rug. My arms flailed. I fell hard, my head narrowly missing the corner of the desk. My body screamed in protest, but my mind was fixed on the letters, on the casual, cruel way my reality had been edited before my eyes. And then I felt it. The familiar, sickening lurch. The world dissolving. Click. I was standing at my desk. The sudden shift was more violent this time. My body ached from a fall that hadn't happened. The sweat of a panic that was erased still felt slick on my skin. I stood perfectly still, my hand on the closed lid of my laptop. I didn't dare to move. I didn't dare to breathe. My eyes scanned the room. Everything was in its place. The window was clear, no condensation, no message. The desk was neat. The book was on the shelf. The floor was empty. Something is wrong here. The thought was a cold whisper in my skull. It wasn't empty. I wasn't alone. He was standing by the nightstand. He looked exactly like me. My height, my build, my dark hair. He was wearing my clothes, the same gray t-shirt, the same worn jeans, but on him they were different. The shirt was perfectly smooth, without a single wrinkle. The jeans looked freshly pressed. He was clean. He was calm. He was an idealized photograph of me. Stepped out of the frame and into my room. My throat was dry. My muscles tensed up. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something. But I was frozen, pinned in place by a gaze that was both alien and my own. He wasn't looking at me. His attention was on the nightstand. His movements were slow, deliberate. He reached out with a steady hand and picked up the small, silver-framed photo of me and my sister, the one I had knocked crooked in a previous panic, the one where her face had turned to static. With a serene, almost beatific smile playing on his lips, my lips, he carefully adjusted the frame, setting it perfectly upright. He tilted his head, admiring his work. The static on my sister's face seemed to churn, slower now, as if pacified by his touch. My blood froze. What is this? This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't an apparition. This was solid. This was a replacement. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. My mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He finally turned his head and looked at me. His smile didn't waver. There was no recognition in his eyes. There was no hostility. There was nothing but a placid, unnerving contentment. He saw me, but it was the way you'd see a piece of furniture that was out of place, an error that needed to be corrected. He began to move through the room. It wasn't a walk. It was a glide. He drifted over to the wall where I had leaned, where my sweaty palm had left a faint print. He raised his hand and wiped it away with a single smooth motion. The wall was perfect again. He then moved towards the center of the room, to the spot where I had hurled my desk chair at the window in a fit of rage loops ago. The chair was now, and had been, sitting neatly at my desk, but he stopped, his head cocked as if listening to an echo of the past. He knelt down. He laid his palm flat on the carpet. And then, the impossible happened. Splinters of dark wood began to push up through the fibers of the carpet. Tiny shards at first, then larger chunks, the broken legs, the shattered backrest, a pile of wreckage from a memory pulled into the present. He began to pick them up, piece by piece. He held a splintered leg in one hand and a piece of the seat in the other. He didn't try to fit them together, he just held them near each other. The wood seemed to soften. The sharp, broken edges flowed like wax, melding, fusing back together without a seam, without a sound. He fixed the chair, piece by impossible piece, holding them together until they were whole again. He assembled the entire chair from its phantom debris right there on the floor. When it was done, a perfect, unbroken copy of my desk chair, he nudged it with his finger and it slid across the floor, coming to rest beside its twin at the desk. I stared, my mind completely shattered. This defied everything. Logic, physics, sanity. This wasn't a loop. This wasn't a prison. This was a workshop. And I was the flaw being smoothed away. "We just need this to be perfect," he said. A chill ran down my spine, so cold it felt like a shard of ice. His voice was my voice. The same pitch, the same cadence. But it was stripped of all anxiety, all emotion. It was the calm, soothing tone of a hypnotist, or a mortician. He stood up, brushing non-existent dust from his perfect jeans. He came closer. I tried to back away, but my feet were lead, my back pressed against the wall. I was trapped. "Don't make a mess," he whispered, stopping just in front of me. His smile was unwavering. His eyes, my eyes, were empty of everything but a tranquil horror. "This is our forever place." Our place. The word echoed in the dead air of the room. Our. That was it. The final thread of my sanity snapped. All the fear, the confusion, the creeping dread, it all coalesced into a single point of pure, incandescent rage. A rage against him, against this room, against the calm, smiling face that was wearing my own. A scream tore itself from my lungs. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure animal terror and fury. It was every ounce of my breaking will given voice. I screamed and screamed, the sound filling the small room, shaking the very air. I screamed directly into his placid, unmoving face. He didn't even flinch. He didn't recoil. He didn't raise a hand. He just stood there, his serene smile fixed in place, and watched me. He watched me as if I were a storm in a teacup, a brief and pointless tantrum that would soon pass. He let my scream wash over him, an irrelevant noise in his perfectly ordered world. My voice gave out. The scream died into a ragged, painful gasp. My throat was raw, my lungs burned. In the ringing silence that followed, I stood panting, broken, staring into the face of my replacement. And then I heard it. A new sound. It came from outside the door, from the hallway. It was faint but clear. It was a voice, my voice. It was me talking on the phone. The tone was calm, casual, completely normal, as if I were just finishing a conversation with a friend. "No, she can't reach me," my voice said from the other side of the door. There was a pause. "I know. It's for the best." My heart stopped. The blood drained from my face. Who was he talking about? Lily? Sarah? Anya? The voice on the other side of the door sighed, a sound of gentle finality. "I won't be coming out anymore." The voice from the hallway stopped. Just like that. The casual final words, "I won't be coming out anymore," hung in the air for a moment. a death sentence delivered with a sigh. They faded, leaving behind a ringing that was deeper than silence. My back was pressed hard against the wall. I panted, chest heaving, throat raw from a scream that had achieved nothing. In front of me, the doppelganger stood unmoved. He hadn't reacted to my scream. He hadn't reacted to the voice from the hall. That serene, beatific smile was still fixed on his face, a mask of placid cruelty. He gave me one last, gentle glance. It wasn't a look of victory. It was a look of pity, the kind you'd give an animal caught in a trap. Then, he turned away from me. He glided over to my bookshelf. My bookshelf. The one I'd filled over years with sci-fi paperbacks, programming manuals, and a few dusty classics from college. His movements were fluid, economical. He reached out a steady hand and took hold of a book that was leaning at a slight angle. He slid it back, making its spine perfectly flush with the others. Perfection. Order. Correction. My blood ran hot. A fresh surge of adrenaline, born from pure, defiant rage, washed over me. No, not this. I would not let him tidy my tomb. I would not let him straighten the furniture in my hell. If this was my place now, it would be a broken place. Without a moment's hesitation, I launched myself off the wall. I rushed straight towards him, straight towards the bookshelf. He turned his head, that placid smile still there, as if he expected me to attack him. I didn't. I swerved at the last second. I put my shoulder and all my weight into the cheap particle board frame. My body screamed in protest. There was a groan of stressed wood, a high-pitched crack. The entire unit tipped. For a heartbeat, it hung suspended, a monument to my defiance. Then it came crashing down. The sound was glorious. A thundering boom as the frame hit the floor, followed by the percussive rain of 300 books. They cascaded, they tumbled, they flew. Hardcovers slammed down with solid, satisfying thuds. Paperbacks fluttered open, pages splaying like broken wings. Dust, thick and gray, exploded into the air, catching the cold blue lamplight in a chaotic swirl. I stood in the middle of the wreckage, my chest heaving, a fierce, desperate joy surging through me. I had made a mess. I had created chaos. I had broken his perfect room. I turned back to him, spitting out a laugh that was half a sob. "Fix that," I snarled. He was gone. The space where he stood was unoccupied. The air was still. But I didn't have time to wonder where he went. I didn't have time to savor my small, violent victory. It was already happening, the sickening lurch in my gut, the familiar, dreadful sensation of the world dissolving around the edges, of reality being rewritten. Click. I was standing at my desk. My hand rested on my laptop. The transition was instant, a brutal cut in the film of my life. My muscles still burned with an effort I hadn't made. The memory of splintering wood and flying paper was so vivid I could almost taste the dust. But the room was pristine. My eyes scanned the room wide with a new kind of dread. My gaze snapped to the wall where the bookshelf had been. It was there, upright, undamaged. The books were all on the shelves, perfectly arranged. My heart sank. Of course they were. But then I looked closer. Something is wrong here. The books were all there, but they weren't right. The spines. I squinted. They were all aligned. A perfect grid of color and text. No, not text. The spines were blank, every single one of them. The bold title of a Stephen King novel. The stark technical font of a coding manual. The elegant script of a classic. All gone. Replaced by smooth, featureless white. Hundreds of nameless, storyless books, standing in silent, ordered rows. An entire library of my life, erased. My blood went cold. This was worse than the picture. This was a lobotomy. A shiver ran down my spine. The erasure wasn't the only change. She was standing there, in front of the bookshelf, where the wreckage had been. It was Sarah. My breath caught in my chest. My throat went dry. It was her, exactly as I remembered her from that last day. The blue dress she loved, the way her hair fell over one shoulder, the look on her face, a look of shattered disbelief and heartbreak, the look I had put there. Her face was streaked with tears, but the tears were wrong. They weren't clear and salty. They were thick, black, like tar. They clung to her cheeks, not dripping, but staining her skin with dark, ugly trails. They looked like oil bleeding from a wound. My whole body stiffened. I stood frozen like a statue. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank. How can this be? Sarah? I whispered. The name felt like broken glass in my mouth. She didn't answer. She didn't even seem to hear me. She just stared. Her eyes, those beautiful brown eyes I knew so well, locked on mine. They weren't accusing anymore. They were just lost, filled with an ancient, unending sorrow. She was a photograph of my guilt, brought to life and weeping poison. I swallowed hard, the sound loud in the dead air. I had to say something, anything. I had to break this horrible tableau. I'm sorry, I stammered. The words were pathetic, meaningless. A small, sad smile touched her lips. A tremble went through her, and then she spoke. "You just had to leave," she whispered. The voice was hers, but it was layered. It seemed to come from her lips, but also from the corner behind me, from the ceiling above. It was a single thread of sound that immediately began to fray, to multiply. "You always just leave," a second whisper joined the first, overlapping it. It was slightly higher in pitch. "Leave," a third voice hissed, low and guttural, coming from somewhere near the floor. My eyes darted around the room. There was no one else here, just me and Sarah. But the voices kept coming, layering, building, a chorus of my own damnation. "You just had to leave. Always leaving. Leave, leave, leave." The whispers coiled around me. They weren't just sound. They felt physical, like grasping, spectral hands. Pressure built in my ears. The air grew thick, heavy. It was difficult to breathe. I clapped my hands over my ears, pressing my palms hard against my skull. It did nothing. The voices weren't outside. They were inside. They were a recording of my deepest failure playing on a loop in my own mind. "You leave everyone. You saw something better and you left. Leave, leave, leave." I stumbled back, shaking my head violently as if I could dislodge the sounds. "No," I croaked. "Stop it." Her image began to shimmer, the black tears on her cheeks seeming to pulse in time with the chorus of whispers. Her heartbroken expression remained unchanged. She was the conductor of this orchestra of guilt. My back hit the door. The solid wood was a small, cold comfort. I was trapped between an accusing ghost and a door that led nowhere. The whispers reached a crescendo, a dizzying, disorienting vortex of sound that threatened to tear my sanity to shreds. My muscles tensed up. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Make it stop. Please, just make it stop." And then, a new sound ripped through the whispers. Scrape! Scratch! 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 It was sharp, frantic, real. It came from the other side of the door, right at the bottom. The whispers faltered. They didn't stop, but they receded, pulling back like a tide, leaving the new sound exposed and clear. Whine. A low, desperate sound. I knew that sound. My heart pounded in my chest. Buster. It was Buster. My old neighbor from 2 floors down, his golden retriever. I hadn't seen him in a year, since Mrs. Gable moved away. What was he doing here? Scratch, scrape, crack, the sound of wood splintering. My eyes flew open. Sarah was gone. The bookshelf with its blank spines was all that remained. The whispers were a faint echo now, drowned out by the desperate assault on the door. He was trying to get in. He was trying to save me. A flicker of hope, hot and fierce, shot through me. An animal. Something real. Something from the outside. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the protesting ache in my joints. I pressed my ear against the wood. The scratching was loud, frenzied. I could hear the dog panting, a mix of panicked breaths and low growls. Then, with a sickening crack, a long, thin splinter of wood broke away from the door frame near the floor. A sliver of light from the hallway cut through the gloom. A crack, an opening. My heart hammered against my ribs. Without thinking, I pressed my face to the floor, tilting my head to get my eye level with the new opening. I held my breath and listened. I looked into the cat's eye. No, the crack in the door. The hallway was dimly lit, the same dingy yellow as always, and I saw him. It was Buster. His golden fur was matted with something dark. His body was tensed with a furious energy, but he wasn't trying to get in. My blood ran cold. He had his back to my door. He was facing the hallway. His powerful front paws were a blur of motion, digging, tearing at the wooden floorboards of the hallway. Claws scraped and gouged the wood, sending splinters flying. He was digging as if he was trying to bury a bone or a body. He was digging a hole right on my threshold. A deep chill, colder than any I had felt before, settled into my bones. This wasn't a rescue. This was a ritual. He paused for a second, his panting loud and wet. He turned his head slightly, as if sensing my gaze upon him. One of his eyes, glowing with a faint, sickly yellow light that did not belong to any living thing, swiveled and locked directly onto mine through the crack in the door. He saw me, and in that glowing eye, I saw no recognition, no animal panic. I saw only a terrible, single-minded purpose. He let out a low growl, a sound that vibrated through the wood and into my skull, and then he returned to his work, digging furiously, relentlessly, at the floor just outside my room. The glow from his eye was not a reflection. It was a light source, a pinprick of foul, yellow energy in the dark slit of the hallway, burning with a purpose that rooted me to the floor. The sound of his claws on the wood was the only thing in the world. Scrape, dig, scrape. A sound that was not about getting in, but about sealing something away, sealing me away. He was digging my grave. Then, without a sound, without a warning, the crack vanished. The door slammed shut in my face with the force of a hydraulic press. Not a click, not a thud. It was a solid, absolute thump that vibrated through the floor and into my bones. The sliver of hallway light was gone. The yellow eye was gone. The scratching stopped. Silence. The whispers of Sarah, which had been a faint echo, were gone too. I was alone again, stuck. But the image was burned onto the back of my eyelids. The dog, the digging, that terrible knowing eye. A wave of heat washed over me. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was rage. A pure, white-hot, cornered animal rage. All the frustration, all the terror, all the confusion of the past hour boiled over inside me. It demanded an outlet. It demanded violence. No! The roar tore from my throat, raw and broken. Without a moment's hesitation, I scrambled to my feet. I took 2 running steps and threw every ounce of my weight into a desperate, furious kick. My bare foot connected with the solid wood of the door right below the handle. There was a sound. Not the satisfying splinter of wood I craved, but a wet, sickening crack that came from inside my own body. An explosion of agony shot up my leg. It was an electric, blinding fire. I screamed, a thin, pathetic sound this time, and collapsed back onto the floor, clutching my foot. I looked down. The angle was wrong. My toes were pointing in a direction they should not be pointing. A bone, one of the metatarsals, had snapped clean through. The pain was immense, a throbbing, all-consuming universe of hurt. Tears of pure physical agony streamed down my cheeks. I glared at the door through a haze of pain. It was pristine, unmarked, not a scratch, not a dent. I had broken myself against it, and it hadn't even registered the impact. I lay there on the floor gasping, the hot pulse of my broken foot matching the frantic, terrified drumming of my heart. The room was still. The bookshelf with its blank spines stood like a silent white tombstone. My tombstone. Maybe the dog hadn't been digging my grave. Maybe he was just marking the spot. The pain was a sharp, jagged anchor. It was real. It was proof that I was real, that this was happening. I focused on it, held on to it. As long as it hurt this much, I was still here. I was still Cole. I squeezed my eyes shut, gritting my teeth against another wave of nausea from the pain. Click. The pain vanished. It didn't fade. It didn't recede. It was just gone. One instant, my foot was a supernova of agony. The next, nothing. My eyes flew open. My heart pounded. I was standing in the center of the room, my weight evenly on both feet. I looked down. My foot was fine, perfect. No swelling, no unnatural angle. It was as if the kick had never happened, as if the bone had never broken, but the room was not the same. A shiver ran down my spine. The bookshelf was still there, its spines blank and accusing. But the walls were stained. Dark, sprawling patches blossomed across the clean white paint like water damage from a flood that had happened years ago. They snaked up from the floorboards and dripped down from the ceiling, ugly and organic. The air smelled of damp earth and rot. And the light. The warm yellow glow from my desk lamp was gone. In its place was a cold, clinical blue light. It cast long, sharp shadows and bleached all the color from the room, making my skin look pale and waxy. It was the light of a morgue, the light of an operating theater. It was a light that observed death. My eyes scanned the room, wide with a frantic, desperate search for the next aberration, the next violation. And I saw him. He was standing by the closet. He hadn't been there a second ago. He was tall, impossibly tall and thin, his body a collection of sharp angles beneath a threadbare, old-fashioned black suit. He was gaunt, his face a hollowed-out mask of tight, pale skin and deep-set shadows where his eyes should be. He just stood there, a forgotten scarecrow dredged up from the bottom of a lake. In his long, spider-like fingers, he held a single object, a tarnished silver pocket watch chained to his vest. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anything in the room. His head was bowed, his entire focus on the watch in his hand. Who is behind all this? The question exploded in my mind. Was it him? Was this creature the architect of this place? The zookeeper of my private cage? I didn't speak. I didn't dare. I just watched him. He didn't move. The only motion was the slow, deliberate turning of his thumb as it wound the crown on the watch. A small, mechanical, scraping sound. And then another. Tick. The sound was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. Tick. It came from the watch, a steady, rhythmic, mechanical beat. Tick. My throat went dry. My muscles tensed up. That sound. It was a clock. A countdown. But to what? I held my breath and listened. The whole world seemed to shrink down to that single metronomic sound. Tick, tick, tick. It was the only sound in the dead room. It was the sound of time passing in a place where time meant nothing. It was the sound of a bomb. A soft pressure on my shoulder. I flinched so hard I almost fell. A gasp escaped my lips. I spun around. The doppelganger was standing right beside me. He hadn't made a sound. His face was inches from mine, that same serene smile fixed in place. His hand, my hand, rested on my shoulder. It was cold, colder than Anya's fingers. It was a cold that felt like it was leaching the heat from my very bones. "It's almost time," he said. His voice was my voice, but calm, soothing. The voice of a pilot announcing the final descent. My blood ran cold. Everything is being put in its right place. I stared at him, my mind a blank wall of static, my own face, my own voice telling me my time was up. Who was I? Was I the panicked wreck or the calm monster standing beside me? I opened my mouth to scream, to curse, to say something, anything. Snap. The sound was loud, sharp, and final. It wasn't the reset click. It came from the gaunt figure by the closet. He had snapped the silver watch shut. The ticking stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, profound. He lifted his head, and for the first time, I felt his attention on me. I couldn't see his eyes in the deep shadows of his sockets, but I felt a gaze that was ancient and utterly indifferent. Then, a sound from across the room. Crack, shatter! My head whipped toward my desk. The blue bulb in my lamp had exploded, not just flickered out. It had shattered with violent force. A spray of fine glass dust and larger shards rained down across my keyboard and the wooden surface of the desk. The corner of the room was plunged into darkness. A deep, absorbing darkness that the remaining light from the window seemed to fear, its edges pulling back. A tangible cold began to pour out from that corner, a draft from a place that wasn't there. My whole body shook uncontrollably. The room wasn't just changing anymore, it was breaking. He was breaking it. The gaunt man, the conductor, remained motionless for a long moment. He didn't seem to have caused the lamp to shatter, but it had obeyed the closing of his watch as if he'd thrown a stone at it. My doppelganger's hand was still on my shoulder, a cold, heavy anchor. I was frozen between them, the smiling twin and the silent executioner. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, the conductor moved. His thumb found the latch on the pocket watch. He pressed it. With a soft spring, the silver lid opened again, and the ticking returned. Tick. A sound ripped through the air above me. It was the sound of a giant bone snapping. I looked up. A long, jagged crack had splintered across the ceiling. It started above the closet and raced across the plaster, a black fissure in the white expanse. Dust, thick and gray, rained down, catching in the remaining light, smelling of old, dead things. Tick. A low groan came from the wall to my left, the one that was supposed to have a window, the one where I'd seen the bricks. The groan deepened into a grinding, protesting shriek of stressed material. My eyes locked onto it. The dark stains on the walls began to darken further, to glisten. In the center of the largest stain, a single, thick, black droplet formed. It hung there for a second, impossibly heavy, before stretching and falling, splattering silently on the floorboards. Then another appeared, and another. The bricks weren't just showing through, the wall itself was bleeding, a slow, black, viscous hemorrhage. Tick. The doppelganger squeezed my shoulder, a gesture of reassurance that felt like a threat. "See?" he whispered, his voice a placid hum against the sounds of destruction. Perfection. A final correction. Tick. Another crack, spiderwebbed across the ceiling. A piece of plaster the size of my hand broke free and crashed to the floor, exploding into white powder. Tick. The floorboards beneath my feet shifted. A low, powerful shudder ran through the room as if the building's foundations were giving way. Tick. The bleeding on the wall quickened, the black fluid now running in thin rivulets, staining the wood of the floor. The room was coming apart at the seams. It was being unmade. And the conductor just stood there, his head bowed to his watch, the instrument of this undoing. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, a frantic, fleshy drum trying to keep up with the cold, mechanical beat of the watch. But it couldn't, because the ticking was getting faster. Tick, tick. 2 more cracks spread across the ceiling, intersecting with the first. The groaning of the walls grew louder, more pained. Tick, tick, tick. The pace was accelerating. The sound was no longer a calm metronome. It was becoming a frantic, desperate rhythm. The sound of a runaway clock, its gears stripped, its spring about to snap. Tick, 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 tick. The room was a symphony of destruction. The groan of wood, the crack of plaster, the soft, wet sound of the bleeding walls. And underneath it all, driving it all, was the sound of the watch, a relentless, escalating engine of decay, ticking my world into absolute oblivion. The sound was a solid thing, a physical presence in the ruined space. Tick, 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 tick. A frantic, metallic heartbeat counting down the final seconds of a world. My world. My room. My doppelganger's hand was a cold weight on my shoulder, his serene smile a grotesque counterpoint to the chaos. Perfection, he whispered, his voice smooth as glass over the grinding destruction. A final correction. Tick. The floorboards directly beneath my feet gave way. They didn't break, they rotted. In an instant, the solid wood turned dark, soft, spongy as month-old mulch. I sank an inch, the texture under my bare feet changing from hard wood to damp, yielding decay. The smell of rich, black soil and grave rot filled my nostrils. My stomach heaved. Tick. The largest crack in the wall beside the closet yawned open. A deep, guttural groan of tearing plaster and splintering studs filled the air, but there was no hallway beyond it, no apartment building, no brick wall. There was only a profound and silent blackness, a perfect, featureless void that didn't reflect light, but drank it. The cold blue glow from the desk lamp's shattered remains seemed to bend away from it, terrified. The room was no longer a room. It was a crumbling stone adrift in an ocean of nothing. Tick. The doppelganger straightened the collar of my t-shirt, a gesture of unnerving intimacy. Everything is in its right place now. His voice was a soothing poison. I stared into my own eyes, set in his placid face, and saw nothing there. No fear, no soul. And they appeared. Not all at once, but flickering into existence like bad frames in a reel of film. My welcoming committee. Over on the bed, sitting cross-legged on the rumpled duvet, was Lily. Her small form was hunched over her notepad. The dry, rhythmic scratch of her black crayon on the paper joined the frantic ticking of the watch. She wasn't humming anymore. She was just drawing, her head cocked to one side. By the closet door, beside the gaping hole into the void, stood Al the handyman. He was no longer working on the hinges. He was slowly, methodically polishing the shaft of his old, rust-stained screwdriver with a grimy rag. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second. He gave a single, slow nod, as if to say, "Job's done, kid." Anya, the paramedic, flickered into being by the shattered desk. The morgue light from the dying bulb glinted off the needle of the syringe she held. She smiled her cold, predatory smile, her eyes filled with a clinical satisfaction. She lifted the syringe, tapping it with a long finger, watching an invisible bubble rise through the dark fluid inside. And near the bleeding wall, where the black tar still slid down in thick rivulets, stood Sarah. Her face was a mask of tear-streaked grief. The black tears dripped from her chin, splattering onto her shirt. Her lips moved, and the whispers returned, no longer faint, but filling the space around her, a chorus of layered accusation. You always just leave. You just had to leave. Leave, leave, leave. They were all here. My sins, my fears, my judges, and my jury. I looked from one to the next, a gallery of personal torment assembled for a final viewing. Who is behind all this? The question felt stupid now. They all were. It was a group project. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic animal trapped in a cage of bone. A shiver ran down my spine, a wave of such intense cold, it felt like my blood was turning to ice. My whole body shook uncontrollably. It was over. I had lost. This was it. This was the end. The final click. But as I looked at the calm, smiling face of my twin, at the assembled horrors waiting patiently for the show to end, a spark ignited somewhere deep inside me. It was not hope. It was something more primal. A cornered rat's defiance. A last, meaningless lunge against the inevitable. It was the refusal to just stand here and let it happen. No, I breathed. The word was barely a sound. Without a moment's hesitation, I shoved the doppelganger. Hard. My hands connected with his shoulders. He felt solid, real, but impossibly cold, like pushing against a block of ice. The force sent him stumbling back a step, his serene smile finally faltering into a look of mild surprise. And I ran. I didn't look at the conductor. I didn't look at the phantoms. My entire world narrowed to a single point. The door. The one way out. The first lie and the last chance. I bolted. My feet pounded on the rotting floor. Each step was a gamble, the soft mulch-like wood sinking under my weight, trying to suck me down. It was like running through thick, wet mud. I felt a board splinter completely under my left foot, and I nearly went down, my arms windmilling for balance before I found purchase again. The sound of the watch changed. The rapid tick-tick-tick blurred into a single high-pitched, continuous shriek, like a dentist's drill boring directly into my brain. The blackness behind the broken walls began to pour into the room. It wasn't a liquid, it was an anti-light, a tangible nothingness that crept across the floor and up the remaining walls, eating the space, erasing my world behind me. The air grew thick and heavy with its presence. My lungs burned. I ran with everything I had left, my muscles screaming in protest. I stared at the door, focusing on the brass doorknob. It was my North Star, my salvation, but it was getting further away. This is impossible. With every 2 steps I took, the door seemed to slide back one. The distance between us stretched, the hallway an optical illusion designed to break my spirit. I could hear Sarah's whispers rising in pitch, twisting around the shriek of the watch. Leaving, 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 leaving. I risked a glance to my right. The conductor. He hadn't moved, but he had raised the watch. He held it up before the hollow sockets of his eyes, the silver chain dangling. I could see the face of the watch clearly now, and I could see the second hand, a thin black needle sweeping smoothly, inexorably, up toward the 12. 5 seconds. My eyes snapped back to the door. I roared, a raw, wordless sound of pure effort, and threw myself forward, pumping my arms and legs with a final, Desperate burst of adrenaline. The rotting floor gave way to solid boards again near the door. My feet found solid ground. 4 seconds. The black void was at my heels, its profound cold licking at my ankles. The light in the room was almost gone, compressed into a tiny circle around me and the door. 3 seconds. My hand was outstretched, my fingers reaching, straining for the doorknob. It was so close, so close. The brass seemed to gleam in the dying light. 2 seconds. The conductor stood silhouetted against the coming dark, a silent, gaunt statue of finality. The second hand on his watch ticked past the 11. 1. My fingers brushed the cold, smooth metal of the doorknob just as the shriek of the watch cut out. In the split second of stunning silence that followed, I heard one last, final tick. My hand clamped around the knob. I didn't twist, I wrenched it. I threw my entire body weight, all my momentum, all my terror and fury into the door. It swung open, and for a blinding second I saw. It wasn't the hallway. It was night. Rain. The piercing, strobing flashes of red and blue lights painting everything in frantic, disjointed snapshots. I saw the twisted, mangled metal of a car, my car, wrapped around a telephone pole. The windshield was a spiderweb of shattered glass. The air was filled with a high-pitched wail of sirens and the smell of gasoline and wet asphalt. I wasn't standing. I was looking down from a strange angle at a body on a stretcher surrounded by figures in rain-slicked uniforms. One of them, a man with a tired face and graying hair, a real paramedic, not Anya, shone a small light into the vacant eyes of the body on the gurney. He pulled the light back, his expression grim. He looked at his own wrist, at a simple, practical, digital watch. He sighed, and his breath plumed in the cold night air. "We've lost him," he said to the policewoman beside him. Time of death, 11:13 p.m. My brain struggled to connect the dots, to process the image, the words, the rain on my... Slam. The door slammed shut with the force of a bank vault. The sound was a hammer blow, a period at the end of a sentence, a final, irreversible verdict. I was thrown back, not onto a floor, but into nothing. The light was gone, all of it. The sound was gone, the sirens, the rain, the conductor's watch, Sarah's whispers. All of it was erased. I was floating in a perfect, silent, starless dark. The air, thick and stale, stopped flowing. My lungs burned for a breath that wouldn't come. I flailed my arms, my hands hitting a rough, unfinished surface just in front of my face. Wood. I kicked out my legs. More wood. I reached out to my sides, up, down. Wood. Wood. On all 6 sides. Close. So close I couldn't even turn around. A box. The crayon drawing Lily had made. The long, narrow box under the ground. And then a new sound. Faint, muffled, far away from somewhere above me. Scrape. 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 The frantic, determined scratching of claws, and another sound followed it. A soft, rhythmic thump. Thud. The sound of dirt. The sound of shovelfuls of wet, heavy earth landing on a lid. My lid. The image burned behind my eyelids, red and blue, smeared by rain. The metallic screech, a sound I hadn't heard but now felt in my bones. Twisted steel, my steel, wrapped around a pole like a ribbon. My face, I saw my own face, vacant and pale on a stretcher. A man's voice, tired and final. "We've lost him. Time of death, 11:13 p.m. What was that? What did I just see? My head was spinning with questions. Was that a premonition, a vision? Or was it a memory? Was that me? The driver? Am I dead? The questions swirled in a vortex, a logic-shredding cyclone in my brain. This is impossible. Slam. The sound was a physical blow, a concussion that annihilated thought and image. It wasn't the click of a latch, it was the roar of a tomb sealing shut. An exclamation point of solid oak and steel marking the end of everything. The force of it threw me backward. I didn't stumble. I fell into a void. There was no floor to catch me, no wall to hit, just nothing. The light was gone, every molecule of it. The faint, morgue-like blue from the broken lamp, the hungry blackness pouring from the walls, the piercing strobes of the crash, all extinguished. I was suspended in a dark so complete, it felt like a thick velvet fluid. The sound was gone too, a silence so profound it was a pressure against my eardrums. The conductor's ticking, Sarah's layered whispers, the high-pitched shriek of the watch, the wail of sirens, all of it had been surgically removed from reality. I couldn't even hear my own breathing. I couldn't feel my own heartbeat. My heart is pounding. I know it is, but the sound is gone. Swallowed. I was floating, a disembodied consciousness in an ocean of what? What is this? Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through me. I was not floating. My back was pressed against something hard. My feet, too. Reflexively, I flailed my arms, my hands searching the darkness. My fingers brushed a surface just in front of my face. It was close, inches away. I traced its texture. Wood, rough, unfinished pine. The dry, dusty smell of it filled my nostrils. I could feel the microscopic ridges of the grain, the sharp edge of a potential splinter. My right hand shot out to my side. Wood. My left. Wood. I kicked out with my legs, my heels connecting with a dull thud. Wood. I pushed myself up, my hair brushing against the surface above me. Wood. Wood on all 6 sides. My throat is dry. The realization didn't dawn on me. It crashed into me. A box. The room was gone. The apartment was gone. This wasn't a room anymore. It was a box. The long, narrow box from Lily's crayon drawing. The one with a stick figure, with me inside it, buried deep under a scribble of brown earth. A coffin. A single animalistic sound tore from my throat, but it had nowhere to go. It died in the thick, stagnant air an inch from my lips. I couldn't even scream properly. The sound was flat, dead, absorbed by the raw wood. Without a moment's hesitation, I pushed. I braced my feet against the bottom, my back against the wall behind me, and shoved with all my strength against the lid above. It didn't move, not a millimeter. It felt as solid as a granite slab. My muscles tense up, straining until they trembled, every sinew screaming. It was useless. Rage erupted, a hot, blinding geyser of it. I pounded on the lid with my fists. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was dull, pathetic, swallowed by the wood. It was the sound of a trapped thing, a frantic, futile beat against the inevitable. I didn't stop. I rained blows against the lid, my knuckles cracking against the unyielding pine. Pain flared up my arms, a clean, sharp sensation in the crushing dark. I welcomed it. It was real. A sliver of wood drove itself under the nail of my forefinger. I roared, a choked, muffled sound, and kept hammering. I beat against the wood until my knuckles were raw, wet, and pulpy. It didn't matter. The box didn't care. I slumped back, my chest heaving. Each breath was a labor. But air is so thick that breathing is difficult. It was warm and stale, tainted with the coppery scent of my own blood and the dust of my own tomb. I have been corrected, put in my right place. The doppelganger's voice slid into my mind, as calm and clean as it had been in the chaotic room. Everything is in its right place now. He had smiled when he said it. A serene, placid smile. He wasn't a monster trying to kill me. He was an editor tidying up a messy draft. I was the typo. This box was the correction fluid, all of them. They weren't just random horrors. They were a committee. Al, the handyman, tightening the screws on the door, not to keep me in the room, but to make sure the box was sealed tight. Some doors ain't meant to be opened, kid. His gruff voice echoed in the claustrophobic space. You broke the seal. Now the pressure's all wrong. Was this what he meant? The seal on my life? The pressure of reality? Anya, the paramedic, with her cold fingers and her clinical pronouncements. Subject's heart rate is erratic. Pupils dilated. Significant cognitive decline. She hadn't been threatening me. She was reading a report. My report. The report from the crash scene. And Sarah. Oh God, Sarah. Her face streaked with black tar like tears. You always just leave. You just had to leave. I left her. I walked out of the restaurant and never looked back. I got in my car. I was angry. I was driving too fast. Was that it? Was that the moment? Did I always just leave? Is that what I did tonight, leaving my own body on a rain-slicked road? My whole body shakes uncontrollably. A deep, bone-rattling shudder that had nothing to do with cold. This wasn't a random hell. It was custom-made. It was the Franklin place, my place, tailored for me, out of the materials of my own life, my own failures, my own guilt. Lily's drawing. She knew. The little girl who wasn't a little girl had known the ending before it even started. She had just been drawing the blueprints. A tear, hot and sharp, escaped my eye and traced a path through the grime on my temple. What is this all about? Am I dying, replaying my last moments as my brain shuts down, or am I already dead? Is this it? Is this forever? The doppelganger's other words came back to me, a soothing whisper of damnation. Don't make a mess. This is our forever place. No, I whispered, the word a dry rasp. No. The despair was a suffocating blanket, but beneath it, that cornered rat was still kicking. I couldn't accept it. I wouldn't. I changed my position, grunting with the effort in the cramped space. I pressed my back against the lid and planted my feet on the bottom. I pushed with my legs, using the strongest muscles in my body. The wood groaned, a faint, creaking protest. Hope, sharp and electrifying, shot through me. I pushed again, harder. A bead of sweat dripped into my eye, stinging. Groan! The sound was louder this time. The lid was bowing. I could feel it give, just a fraction of an inch. Come on, I grunted, my voice a strained wreck. I gathered every ounce of strength I had left, my thighs screaming, my back muscles on fire, and shoved. Crack, a loud splintering sound. But it wasn't the lid. A sudden, sharp pain exploded in my right leg, my ankle. I had pushed too hard, at a bad angle. The bone had given way before the wood did. I collapsed, crying out, a white-hot agony radiating up my shin. I landed in a heap at the bottom of the box, my useless leg twisted beneath me. It was over. It was really over. I lay there, panting in the dark, the fire in my ankle, a mocking reminder of my final, failed effort. Defeated, broken. I closed my eyes, as if that could make the darkness any darker. I waited for the last of the air to run out. I waited for the end. And then, a sound. It was faint, distant, coming from above. I held my breath and listened, my ears strained against the crushing silence. Scrape. My eyes snapped open. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was a frantic, determined sound, the sound of claws, claws on wood, scratching, digging, Buster. The name formed in my mind like a prayer. It was the neighbor's dog, the dog I heard whining and scratching outside my door, what felt like a lifetime ago. He was up there. He was on top of the box. He could hear me, or smell me. He was trying to get to me. Scrape, 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 scrape. The sound grew more insistent, more desperate. He was digging. He was trying to dig me out. A flicker of hope, so powerful it was almost painful, ignited in my chest. He was alive. He was in the real world, which meant this box was in the real world. It was buried, but it was real. If he could dig, maybe someone else could dig. Maybe I wasn't in hell. Maybe I was just buried alive. A horrifying thought, but 1,000 times better than the alternative. "Buster!" I yelled, my voice cracking, the sound instantly deadened by the wood. "Here, boy! I'm here!" The scratching stopped. My heart plummeted. Did I scare him off? "Buster," I whispered. The silence pressed in again, heavier than before. The hope flickered and died. He was gone. I was alone again. A sob built in my chest, a racking, hopeless sound, and then another sound reached me. It was different, not the frantic scrape of claws. This was a soft, rhythmic noise. From above, thump, a pause, thump. It was a heavy sound, measured. I strained to place it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was methodical. Thump. The sound of something being dropped. A weight. Thump. Thud. And suddenly, I understood. My blood ran cold. It wasn't the sound of digging out. It was the sound of filling in. The sound of earth. The sound of a shovelful of wet, heavy dirt hitting a lid. My lid.